I don't have to today. It's a very exciting opportunity not to be the facilitator. So happy to have you, Greg, to do that facilitation. Before we get started on that, a couple admin items. So our next AHA with Amplify is very exciting. I'm super thrilled that we've managed to get Jeffrey Kahn to come and talk to us. And he's going to talk about supply chain and some digital technology in relation to supply chain. So it's going to be a really great session. Jeffrey Kahn is an international best-selling author. He worked with us when we were at Deloitte, and so he's a very well-known speaker. He presents at many conferences. His industry specialty is energy. However, he will be working with us from a diverse industry perspective. So very excited to talk about supply chain, which is obviously incredibly relevant to our network and AHA members. So the finance leaders and the business owners that are working with all of the supply chain challenges across industries will be able to hear from Jeffrey in terms of what is happening from a digital solution perspective, and a lot of other digital hot topics will be covered as well. So make sure to sign up for that. We'll share the invite throughout today's session so that you can also sign up directly to hear Jeffrey for April, the third Tuesday of April. In May, we are having another author come join us, and she hasn't released her book yet. So you will have an opportunity to get a pre-screen of the 24-hour rule. So Adrienne, who's with Risk Oversight, is joining us, and she's a specialist in dynamic documentation. But it's a pretty exciting topic in regards to how finance leaders and business owners can use documentation in regards to process, efficiencies, and just even like making meetings more effective. And so I think there's a lot of generational opportunities to discuss here. We see a lot of people now recording meetings instead of taking minutes and using visuals as opposed to written narratives. And there's just so much diversity in terms of what's best practice that I think a good conversation about ideas and how to be open-minded to new technology will be a really good opportunity in May. So lots of exciting things coming up. We'll share some of those links with you throughout today. And without further ado, I want to pass it to Greg and sit back and not be a facilitator today, which is so exciting. Greg's here to host us and make sure we stay on track. So thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Jamie, and welcome everyone. And as Jamie said, Greg Coates. I'm the CEO of Black Owl Systems, and we'll talk a bit about that later. For the last 17 years, I've been with Lumina Management Consulting, doing a lot in the ERP finance process space. And as well, some of you may have seen me, I do a lot of seminars for CPA Alberta and CPA BC on ERP selection and financial health checks. So this is a passion for me. You know, the topic today, and I think this is why Jamie asked me to facilitate this meeting. So I want to go back and just kick it off, and no presentations, but I want to talk about the way it was in the 90s. You know, back when I was with Sask Oil, and I was in the area office of Lloydminster and in Regina as well. And back then, systems were new. You know, this was exciting times. A new accounting system was coming. You know, we were pumped. It was excited, but they did things differently. And we had 5 area offices with Sask Oil. So we got the new financial accounting system. It was rolled out to corporate first, and then each area was being deployed separately. But what we allowed was each person could get their wish list. Oh, we can change this. We can customize this. So you think about this, there were 6 separate implementations. And after a 2-year process, they realized one of the area offices had very specific requirements. Well, when we finished, all of his stuff that he wanted was wiped out because all the other offices behind him kept changing things, and the implementer said, hey, this is fine, we'll keep going. So it caused a lot of commotion. And what we ended up having to do is throw out all the customizations and go back to bare bones. And there was a lot of effort and hindsight saying we should have done this at the start, but you know, we didn't know any better. You know, this was new, this was exciting. So then I want to go a couple of years later when I was heading up the internal audit group, and we were doing an audit of the one of those area offices that went onto that new accounting system. And while we're doing the audit, somebody was talking about this spreadsheet, and it took them each month then 5 days to build this spreadsheet, upload it, getting all of this, but they're getting information from the new system. And we, to me, it just didn't sound right. 5 days to build a spreadsheet. Well, we dug into it, and who's using this information, what this was. Well, this was a spreadsheet that was happening before the new system was put in. They had carried on for 2 years, spending 5 days a month building this spreadsheet, building the reports. It was going into a shared directory, and nobody questioned it. And so, it just links with systems and processes, how critical they are. And the key goes back to people. Nobody ever raised the question, why am I doing this? When I get all the stuff out of my system, I'm recreating it again. So I just wanted to share those stories and say, this is the way it is. And we're going to something much more controlled and much more focused now with system implementations, managing our finance operations and managing our data. And so as today, when I do anything assignments, it's always focused first on the people, next on process, then systems. And what's coming more relevant as well is the data, the information. And that is, the fourth foundation now that I've seen in the last few years is we've got to focus on data first as equal contributors to any system information you're trying to pull, any new implementations or any improvements you're doing. So with that said, I'll pass it on to Tara to kick us off.
Yes, thank you. So you don't actually need me here because Greg just gave examples that I was going to give them. So process, we put Ryan at the end because he's going to talk about people and he's going to probably talk the most, but people is obviously a huge part of process. But I'm going to talk to process and continuous improvement, which is definitely a subject that I'm very passionate about. For those of you that don't know me, I run the operations group here at Amplify, and I have been responsible for building new processes and for documenting our processes and for looking at an overall workflow. And it's constantly evolving. We utilize a lot of technology and we're finding new ways to do things and better ways to do things. So this is a topic that I for whatever reason, I'm very passionate about. Gets me really excited. I would not consider myself to be a subject matter expert though, but I'm still, I love finding new ways to do things, making things more efficient, having people work better. So I'm really excited to be speaking on the topic. So when I think about processes and how to make changes to processes, I kind of think about 4 steps. You need to build a process, obviously, and after you've built it, you can improve it over time. And eventually you want to master the process. And we're using a lot of technology. So your process might not ever be fully mastered because technology is changing. These developers, ERPs, everybody is adding new functionality. There's new apps coming in, new ways of doing things. So you have to remain nimble with your process, and you're probably always fine-tuning it. And then eventually you might get to the point where you're able to automate stuff, and that's a really exciting step. So when you think about processes and building a process, chances are your process is already there. It's already built. Maybe it's in your mind. You know that you need to do certain clicks, certain steps to get a task done. Maybe you have something written. Probably more often than not, you don't have things written down, which is unfortunate. But before you can really dig into how to improve a process, I encourage you to document what you've built. Write it down. Now, I don't know if I've heard a lot of people say, I love to document. I know it was always something that people would get annoyed with when you're at the firm and partners would be very specific about what color of pen you used and things like that. So most people will say, oh, I don't love writing stuff down. I don't love doing it. But if you ask them, most people would agree with you that it is an important step and it is something you should be doing. And I can say that seeing a process visually laid out end to end can be a real eye opener. So when I first started in industry, I was green, very green, and I used that to my advantage. I always asked tons of questions. I was a prolific note taker. information. And I always like to understand.
Tara, we're having problems hearing you.
Oh no. Is that better?
Slightly.
Slightly. I didn't even touch anything.
Oh, yeah.
I have lots of, I swear.
Are other people having issues hearing Tara?
Yes.
All right, hang on a second.
Sounds
I
like.
am going to, I will start by turning my volume up. See, tech checks don't always work, Jamie. Is that? Yes, no?
Nothing right now.
Oh
Okay,
no.
let's move to Jordan and then maybe it'll be fixed when we come back.
Sure. Okay. Well, the good news is process relates right to technology, and kind of technology comes after you get your processes a little bit more figured out. So for those new faces that don't know me or those that do, I'm the Chief Growth Officer with Amplify. And my story around technology is kind of a passionate one, and it started from my history of really, specializing in sales and marketing and putting the two together. So when we talk to, sorry, somebody conversation or a note just popped up about the technology. That's funny. But when we talk to you about technology, there's kind of three things we want to talk to today, and I'm going to tell kind of a little bit of a story on where my passion for technology came and where I started to see the opportunity to streamline business processes, systems, and that sort of thing. So that being said, those three areas that we're going to talk to today are we're going to talk about the actual industry of ERP technology or ERP technology and other apps as well, and where they're going, and then how they're actually helping establish systems, processes, stability, discipline, that sort of thing. So at a previous job, I started out as a business development called specialist, worked my way up to become a partner and a CEO of a very fast moving marketing and media firm. We were growing very rapidly. So to give you an idea, we grew from about 750 grand to 5 million in just over 3 years. And at this time, we were a pretty young company. Our systems and processes were pretty sporadic, if you will, and we didn't really leverage technology to help scale our business. So when we're talking about processes and that sort of thing, we had them, but they weren't, to Tara's points, they weren't really documented in certain areas, and we weren't really leveraging the power of technology to reduce things like manual error and labor. So more specifically, we were a very good sales team. And we sold a lot of different campaigns and that sort of thing all across North America. But what happened is, although we did have, we had kind of a process built in, our sales system was, we used Google Drive to track sales, forecasts, that sort of thing. And it caused issues for our finance and tracking of our P&L, where are we actually making money? Are some states more profitable than others? We didn't really know, right? And we were always kind of beating around the bush and looking at, that month looks good, but we didn't really know why. So having said that, the first thing we did is we started to realize this, and the first piece of technology we started to bring in was actually a CRM, which is just a piece of, just really helps align your sales system and give you a bird's eye view into your sales. It doesn't include financials really and that sort of thing. There's some pieces there and some not. So we actually went with one of the larger partners and thriving partners today with HubSpot. When it came to that technology piece, we were still. Oh, sorry, Jamie. I think the slide dropped there.
Yeah, they want to see you, Jordan.
Oh, they want to see me. Oh, okay. I was looking at it. Okay, that's fine. Perfect. So where was I? Yeah, bring in that CRM. So first things first, we were young people. We never knew what we needed. And when I say we were young, we didn't really have experience in call it implementing a CRM, let alone any kind of system. So as we didn't know what we didn't know, we got the system up and running. I'd say we got it going, maybe using about 30 or 40% of the horsepower that the thing was capable of. And that's just with the CRM itself. Having said that, even though we made that switch to that CRM, we were still able to implement pretty basic processes and systems, from our pipeline to getting invoices and tracking those things to our customers to help out our finance team. So everything started to get streamlined. That was even, again, with not doing things properly. So you leveraging that sort of technology and realizing what engines drive your business, and for us it was sales, bringing in that piece of technology and not knowing what we even knew already helped streamline our processes and systems. So when you add on to that, like an implementation team or a partner that knows what they're doing, and you know what you actually need, and you have your processes and systems, the sky's the limit for how much you can actually reduce manual labor and error and that sort of thing. So when we look at that and go a step further and we look at ERPs, so for those of you that aren't familiar with an ERP, it stands for Enterprise Resource Planning System. And when we think about a CRM, I talked about that just being, sales and marketing. An ERP is designed for your whole business. So it's a single data source that ties in your finance, your inventory, e-commerce, everything, that sort of thing. So it's much, much bigger, and it allows you to, create a sales order, and it's tracked right to your P&L wherever you want it to go, without having to leave the system and do implementations and integrations. So now, Greg mentioned before in the 90s too, that these systems were new and they were just up and coming. And that's an area I always I kind of refer back to. When we look at the history of ERP, it's a very cringeworthy word. I'm sure a lot of you in here that may have worked with it know the pain that it can cause and the struggles. So, and what I mean by that, it's in a server. Often the times there was literally your ERP was set up in a server room. It was 1,000 degrees in there. You needed people to actually come in and fix the thing. If the system broke down, you broke down as a business. So it was kind of a nightmare. And even so, roughly about 50% of businesses since 2000 roughly about 50% of Fortune 500 businesses since 2000 are dead. Those companies are gone. Now, a part of that reason could be the broken systems and just not having the right data. And that's kind of one thing in my opinion, actually, I would say is a main reason why they weren't able to continue. If you don't have the right data, the right systems, the right processes, but your company's growing, you're just losing more control of your business than you ever thought, right? And you don't even really realize it. So now what we're seeing with these industry trends is the ERP industry itself is actually projected to double. And the reason for that, or by 2026. Now, the reason for that is because technology is just getting exponentially better year over year. So there's cloud-based ERPs, right? And cloud-based ERPs are just in the cloud. They're a lot more nimble. They're a lot more agile. And I think what we're going to see is right now, well, we're going to see less integrations and less bolt-on apps to build a system to run your business on. And you're going to see more and more holistic ERPs specifically built for certain industries or types of businesses. So ultimately what that will do is once you have your processes and systems set up, you're going to be able to run a very, very lean operating model through technology. So you're going to decrease your manual labor, you're going to get the right data, and it's going to be specific to your industry or your business. So when we're looking at technology, in short, you can do all these things, and hopefully my story is one that maybe gives you some courage to get out there and take on some new technology, even if you think it's not going to help, because it most certainly will, even if you do it wrong, in my opinion. So it's just a matter of getting started. So hopefully that helps, and that's kind of all I've got to say today, and happy to take questions after.
Thanks, Jordan. We've got we can flip back to Tara if there's no other questions people want to ask Jordan now, or we can save your technology questions to the end for our Q&A.
All right. Can you hear me now? All right, I've switched to the lovely headphones. I'm glad that I spent time doing my hair this morning to put these on, but hey, whatever works, right? So hopefully everybody can hear me now. So going back to process, and Jordan talked a lot about process, and they are all so interconnected. So I'm not trying to date myself, but I did, you know, it's the 90s, but we were in the early 2000s, we were still doing a lot of this stuff as well, and things were more manual. But when I think about process and process improvement, I really think it's important to understand the entire process before you can start looking for improvements. And like I was saying, when I was in my first role in industry, I was very green and I used that to my advantage. So I asked as many questions as I could for multiple reasons. The person I was replacing was going on mat leave, so I had a finite time to suck as much information out of her as I possibly could. And I also just wanted to understand. I was petrified that I was going to do something wrong with these massive spreadsheets that had been thoughtfully and carefully built. And so the biggest issue that we had when I joined was month ends, which is something that happens every month. And it was always so stressful, and we were struggling to get things done, and we couldn't get it done by day 25, and people were breathing down your neck for things. And it felt like there was a better way to do things. And so we built a timeline. We documented the process. We walked through, there was only 2 of us effectively involved in the process. We sat down one day and we just wrote it all out. What is the pain point? I thought it was going to be the spreadsheets, but they were well built. We had a little macro that had been done for us by IT that we just pressed a button and all of the data was updated for Microsoft Dynamics. And nowadays we've got cloud technology that does the same thing. So what was really the issue? And so looking at that process laid out and documented, we found some really quick wins. For whatever reason, we had it in our minds that we couldn't start on month end until we crossed over month end, meaning we couldn't start on March month end until April the 1st. But why were we doing that when we were sitting around with time and waiting for stuff to do? I mean, we knew that depreciation wasn't going to change that month because we hadn't bought anything. So where's the rule that says we can't book depreciation until April 1st and date it March 31st? So we started doing little things like that. Bigger things were we were always waiting on information from our partners, and for whatever reason it would take them a long time to get things to us, and sometimes they would ignore us, and they, you know, instead of grinding them, which I did later as part of kind of mastering our process, we realized that everything was kind of immaterial to our overall results, and we were part of a larger organization as well, and it was certainly immaterial to them. So rather than waiting for actuals each month, we would wait until a certain date, and if we didn't have them, we would use last month and we'd true it up. And it's still one of my greatest achievements, even though it seems like a simple one, is to go from struggling to get month end done by day 25 to having it done easily by day 10. And they were simple changes that we made. And when we added new companies, when we added new properties, it didn't matter if we bought 5 properties or 10 properties. We still just slotted it in. We were still as efficient as can be. And we actually got to the point where we didn't even want to tell our larger organization that we were done sooner because we didn't want them to move up the deadlines. Everybody was afraid that they'd start wanting information by day 5 instead of day 10. So, you know, just looking at your workflow after it was documented, like I said, we found little efficiencies really quickly, and then you can start to look at other efficiencies. Sometimes you realize maybe you've got 3 people involved in the process, 4 people involved in a process, and do you need all 4 people? You know, Ryan's here. Ryan's going to talk about people. Ryan runs our recruiting group, and there's plenty of times where Ryan and I work together on something, and Ryan will look at me and he'll say, well, that's an operations task. And he's probably right. It is something that naturally falls under operations. But when we sit down and we go through the prior process, we realize that he does something and then he waits for me to press a button. And then I let him know that I've done that. And then he goes back in and does something else. And then he waits for me again. And all told, it takes us 2 or 3 days, because we're busy and we're not always available immediately, to create a new user, something that should take 5-10 minutes tops. And so we talk about controls, and one of the beauty of small business is that we're not bound by SOX or CSOX. And that doesn't mean that we just throw controls out the window. We don't abandon segregation of duties, but when we talk about roles and responsibilities, just because it's something that feels like operations or should be operations doesn't mean that there's anything preventing Ryan from being the person that presses that button. Why does Ryan need to wait for me to press a button when all we want to do is create a user? And so, you know, in Amplify itself, we have found ways to kind of, you know, utilize that we're smaller and we don't have to follow these rule books that larger organizations do. And we can still maintain controls, but we can blur the lines a little bit to make things more efficient. And I talked about mastering a process, and Jordan definitely talks about technology, and it is constantly evolving. And there are so many great ways to use technology. And I don't know if you'll ever truly master a process because of that. But, you know, when you get things working, the workflow is efficient, and things are moving well, you can still always fine tune. And, you know, we've got things earmarked where we know Microsoft is coming out with a new feature and we're just constantly waiting for that. We know QBO, which is something that a lot of our clients use. We know they're coming out with new features. Xero is constantly making improvements. And so to be able to say that a process is baked and it's never going to change is just not true. You want to be evolving with the technology and always looking for those improvements because they're probably always there. And I'm very careful to not say looking for a better way to do things, because it doesn't mean that the way you're doing it right now is terrible. It just means that there are more efficient ways to do things. And when you get into automation, which is what is great about technology as well, is something, you know, back at my first job, automation was just not something that I could have even thought of at the time. Neither was cloud accounting for that matter. But, you know, you can look at automation as ways to gain efficiencies again. And how can you reduce errors by having repetitive tasks being done by AI? You know, do we need somebody that actually needs to approve these vendors? Or if we look at the whole process, is somebody reviewing that at the end of the month anyways? So we can look at new vendors at the end of the month. We don't have to stall the process during the month. And it really helps with controls because it reduces touches, it reduces how many people are involved in things, which can automatically make a process more efficient and a little tighter. And it's just, yeah, it's just a great way to get through things and to always be in the back of your mind, you know, is there a better way to, oh, there you go, I just did it. Is there a better way to do it? Is there a more efficient way to do it? I like to consider myself an efficient person. And if I can find 5 minutes in a day, I will absolutely take that. Especially with 2 young kids running around, that means 5 more minutes for mom at the end of the day. It means 5 more minutes for me to do other things at work. And yeah, I love always thinking in a continuous improvement mindset. So that was my spiel. Sorry that it got interrupted.
Hey, it worked out. Thanks, Tara. No, this is great. And I really loved your point you made that, you know, processes, it's never fixed or baked. It's always changing. And that's why I hate using the term best practice, because people think, oh, you know, but there's never a best practice because it's always changing. It's always, you have to adapt. Yeah. So great. I don't see any questions right yet. So we want to hop over to Ryan right now and
Sure.
talk about people.
Yeah, right. It's your number one asset. I'm sure you've heard it a million times. But you know what? The current landscape for us right now, and I'm sure a lot of people on the call are seeing it and feeling it. It's a really hot market in Calgary in particular right now. It's a candidates market, I would say. So, you know, when I go through the 3 topics today that I have in mind to kind of share and try and generate some new thoughts for you, keep that in mind as a stage and a backdrop that really is a candidates market and it's a hot market. So again, people, your number one asset. A common quote or concept, you know, I like to think about is, you know, take care of your people first, and they will help take care of your clients or your customers, and in turn, your customers and clients will take care of your business and your bottom line. So it all does start with your people. And I know we've heard it a million times, and I'm harping on it, but you know, people really don't focus as much here as they should. So with that in mind, you know, I want to go through a few topics here. You can see them on the slide. Some modern staffing options. We'd like to touch on that quickly. The concept of overqualified people. I don't really believe in that concept, but we'll you know, I used to 4 years ago. So let's talk about that, and then retention. So jumping into staffing options first. there's nothing new here for you. I think you're all probably aware of many of these concepts already, but there's certainly some of them are gaining more prevalence in the recent times, and COVID's kind of triggered that. But you have your traditional, your permanent hire, your full-time employee, right? The standard, everyone's got them. And again, number 2 on my list is advisory and consulting. I think vast majority of people are already using that for projects, expert advice, tax, legal, those things. Can you expand or think about different ways you could use that? The other thing you'll hear, the gig economy. So contractors are on the rise, and a lot of companies are starting to use and supplement their teams with contractors and take advantage of this gig economy. And then fractional staff, Amplify does that. We do fractional CFO and fractional controller, but do you have a job that isn't actually full-time? Do you have trouble attracting that part-time person? Have you thought about going through an agency for something like that? Number 5 on my list, a staffing option outsourcing, one we're all pretty familiar with as well. And then, think about those 5 options, and then also throw in the mix of virtual and remote context, which again is gaining momentum quite quickly. So, think about that. What are you using for your staffing model? Have you challenged yourself? And then the other thing, retention is the 3rd item on my slide. You'll see that there, but think about that in the context of retention, because wearing them out, burnout's real, mental health is a growing issue. Is there options that you can get around that and staff for those peak periods? The class line, you don't want to build a church for Easter Sunday. And I'm not suggesting you staff up your team and have more staff than you need for the whole year, but think about that, the impact on retention and burnout if you're not supplementing and helping your team in those peak periods. Again, the other thing I would say is COVID has definitely shifted employers and employees' mindsets quite a bit. We hear it all the time. Carolyn and I in recruiting, we run our recruiting service here for Amplify. We have candidates constantly calling us. I can tell you the top 5 companies in the last 2 weeks that have rolled out 5 days back to the office work to their employees, because we're getting calls from those employees to say what's out there, what's in the market, what are people doing. So think about that. It's not a threat. There's not a one size fits all, but think about that and that impact it has for your staffing model.
Hey, Ryan, I just want to ask you a question about that. I had a question come in.
And then, clients, we do have repeat clients.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you cut out there on me.
Sorry, I just had a question there that came in about, and you just hit on the topic there about people going back to the office. With the hybrid work model, or what are you hearing out there with, work from home, work from office? Do you want to just elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, we honestly, we're hearing a very big mix. I would say 4 months ago, we heard almost every single company considering a hybrid model. And then when the rubber hit the road in the last 2 weeks since the restrictions have lifted, we've heard a lot of companies saying, you know what, that's a nice to have. Let's all go back in the office 5 days a week and we'll deal with it on an accommodations type basis or a one-off request type basis. It's kind of surprised me, to be honest. More and more companies, big, small, medium, all that are kind of going back to the 5 days a week in office. And working on an accommodations basis, open to the role, open to the specific candidate's need, which is a good option as well. So, all I would say is we're still hearing the vast majority is hybrid. Most companies have realized that hybrid is important for culture, maintenance, all those types of things, right? That in-person and productivity, it can make a difference. And it's part of retention as well to me. Like, yes, the flex is nice and some candidates and employees love that, but it's that hybrid gives you the chance to be in person and really build a culture around that in-person interaction.
Okay, good, thanks. And you're breaking up just slightly, just to let you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'll try and get a little closer to my screen.
Oh, no, I think it's technology. I think it's technology. It's not you.
I blame technology. We'll blame Jordan for all of this. So let's talk a little bit on the overqualified. For the temp contractors we put in market, overqualified 100% makes sense. It just makes it easier. There's less hand holding. They're quicker onboarding. They can hit the ground running, essentially, that classic line. But the other advantage is they're going to bring experience and they're going to bring new ideas. They're going to bring new thoughts, maybe different processes and suggestions that you hadn't thought about before, that your current team hasn't seen before. So for temp, for sure, 100% we recommend overqualified hires. But, do we all have a bias towards that permanent hire and thinking about an overqualified candidate? I know myself, 100% I had that before, 4 or 5 years ago when I switched to HR, I 100% had that bias towards, well, they're overqualified. They're not going to stick. There's a retention concern. They're going to get bored. And I think back to that and I wonder, was it my own insecurity? Was I worried they were going to come after my job? Or was it really that retention concern? And that's probably what some of you are thinking right now. Like, why would I put an overqualified person in, they're going to stick for a year and they're going to be gone, right? That's a risk. But what we're seeing is, you know, I can talk to some generational themes and trends we're seeing. So, you know, quickly, the baby boomers, kind of that 57 plus, they're sticking in roles right now about 8 years, right? They are truly defining that loyalty concept. And these are generalizations, but I'm just going to throw some of these at you. The Gen Xers, you know, that 41 to 56-year-old people are around 5 years right now in roles. And then you start getting into the majority of our workforce in that 25 to 40 or the up and comers. They're sticking in roles less than 3 years, 2 years, 9 months. I think if you Google those stats, it's probably around there. It's under 3 years for sure. And that Gen Z, that next generation coming in, is in roles less than 2 years. So that 24 years and younger, that's going to be the vast majority, you know, the growing number of candidates coming into jobs for your companies, those intro roles, they're sticking in years for 2 years, or in jobs for 2 years. And then think about that trend, 8 to 5 to 3 to 2 years, and that next gen coming after the Gen Zs, I think they're dubbing it the alpha generation. It's probably going to trend even lower.
Yeah.
So when I go back to think about that overqualified person, you know, if you're concerned about them not sticking for 1 or 2 years, are you going to get someone to stick for 1 or 2 years anyways? And if you aren't, then why not put an overqualified person in place that can draw on experience, that can put in new processes, has bringing that to the table, right? Has seen it. Maybe you can actually move the needle on things like process improvement, things like automation. So just keep that in mind, because I was there 100%. I was there when I was, you know, a practicing accountant, and now I've kind of shifted gears, but I was 100% there on the overqualified, and it was a bad bias. When I think about, you know, I think Jamie, you throw this quote around quite a bit. It's a Steve Jobs quote. And he often says, you know, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do, right? So again, overqualified definitely fits in that mix. You're going to hire an underqualified or a barely qualified and then teach them the job, or have someone come in and teach you, here's what I've seen, here's what I've done, here's what you should be doing different, here's some experience. So think about that. It's a bit of a concept challenge. But the other thing Carolyn and I see in recruiting too is, why are these overqualified people applying for jobs that they seemingly are overqualified for, especially in a hot market, right? It doesn't make sense. So why are you biasing? Because they probably have reasons, and we hear the reasons because we talk to the candidates. Oftentimes that, you know, COVID has definitely spurred that need or that look for flex, that balance, that people are reprioritizing their life, and they're not all trying to climb the ladder and put in the 80-hour work week anymore. And if you're seemingly overqualified and you come into a job and you can not do it in your sleep, but you can do it very comfortably from a place of experience, that might be all you're looking for. We often see a new industry, people will step back because they're stepping into a new industry. Maybe it's a new city or a country. But the biggest thing we see, aside from the flex and the COVID piece, is leadership. So I've seen it 100 times over where, you know, a client posts for an accountant role or a senior accountant role, and we present candidates that have been manager levels for 1 or 2 or 3 years. And the clients quickly, no, we don't want to talk to them. They're too qualified. And we're like, well, let's talk about them a little bit, because they've been in leadership and they don't want to be a leader anymore. It's a different skill set. It's a completely different skill set. It's a learned skill set. Natural to some people, but a very tricky one to learn if it's not natural to you. So, you know, a lot of these manager people on resume want to go back and be doers, or they want to be, you know, specialists or technical people. And so, you know, the risk is an overqualified person on paper might be an ideal candidate for you, like 100% ideal, and you've glossed over them very quickly. So as a recruiter, we try and slow down hiring managers and let's talk about why they're applying for your role, why they're interested in your role specifically. So on that topic, I mean, before I jump into retention, there's one other concept I kind of want to cover with you. And it's one of, you know, building a team. And we use the concept rock star versus superstar. So a superstar to us, you know, it is that true high potential person. They want growth, they want development, they want to advance in their career, and they are truly a star. Like, you can see it the first time you interview them, you can tell that they're not slowing down. They're going to stepping stone through this job to the next job to the next job. And you can tell, you can pick up on it pretty quickly. But there are rock stars as well, also a star performer, but again, kind of in line with that overqualified. They might not be on that career progression path out of choice. They might not want to get your job in 2 years. They might not want to be the VP finance or whatever it happens to be. You need a mix on your team of stars, superstars, and rock stars. I think a mix helps you with your stability. So picture this, and we've seen it at a client, I won't name the client, but they had 3 kind of senior analysts, senior associate levels, and they had a manager level. The manager got promoted, so naturally they looked to their team of superstars underneath, and they were all really high performers. and they picked one of them because only one can get the manager job, and the other two gave notice and left because they all wanted that next step. They all wanted to go. They all wanted to go because they didn't have a balance of rock stars and superstars. They had all superstars, which is great, but it put them in a really tight bind, and all of a sudden your whole team is basically exiting. So think about that mix. Think about how an overqualified person might stabilize a team for you, not become a risk, or not, play to your bias of wanting your job. So then let's check in a little bit on retention. It's kind of my last topic. I'm rambling a bit. I'm sorry, I'm taking more time than everyone else, but I love to talk. So here we are. So, for retention, it's a hot topic right now. I would say the Great Resignation is a thing. I'm sure you've all heard of it. The reason why we think it's happening right now, what we're hearing is COVID hit over 2 years ago. All of the opportunities kind of dried up. At that time, there was a lot of candidates that were already considering job changes, and they were already looking to move, right? And then they kind of languished for 2 years in a job, and they were kind of open to moving, but there was nowhere to move. There were very limited opportunities. So you're starting to see almost 2 years of turnover happening in one season right now. So it's tricky. I mean, that $100 oil price certainly doesn't hurt. The market confidence in the energy sector in Calgary in particular is very high right now. And the jobs are out there. And I would be lying to you if I told you the recruiters aren't contacting your high performers, because they are. So what is it that's making your candidates sticky? The default answer is always comp. I think I have it on the slide. Yeah, is comp the main driver? That's your default answer, right? Well, I just pay them more and they're sticky. That's not, research will prove that's not actually the case. And what I'm saying here, I should probably slow down a bit. What I'm saying is, make sure you understand what market rates are. Make sure you're paying them their value, but it's not always about comp. There's a lot of other things that make people sticky in your company. Some other main drivers, and Jamie, you can talk to this after I'm done, because I know you've done the research, you read it, you look at it for Amplify as well. The other things we hear from candidates, like firsthand from candidates, the things they're looking for is kind of back to that flexibility thing, that work from home, that hybrid, that fractional. And again, I'm not saying there's a one size fits all for you. I'm not trying to say you should do this because this is what the best practice is. There is no best practice right now. It's what fits your company. But do you understand what your employees want? Like, are you checking in with your employees? What do you want? Like, what are you looking for? And can you accommodate it? Like, is it something you're open to? Or are you going with a hard and fast line, say the bosses says 5 days a week back in office, no flex, just come back? Are you taking that at its face value, or can you look at flexibility and hybrid by role within your team? So think about it. Many candidates are looking for that right now. It's a hot topic. The other thing I would talk about briefly on retention, it's maybe more about candidate pool than retention, but it's this. The concept of remote work is 100% ingrained now, and the tech sector feels it more maybe than the finance accounting sector does. But geographically, there are a lot of people living in Calgary now that are not working for Calgary companies. And that was not necessarily the case 2 years ago, but it has trended up significantly. So if you are that company that's 5 days a week in office, in person, your candidate pool has shrunk in the last 2 years from what you're trying to appeal to, because a lot of those people that are in Calgary and living here are working for companies that aren't based in Calgary. So keep that in mind. Your challenge is not just remote work from home, it's remote geographic companies that are in different cities that are poaching candidates out of Calgary. So keep that in mind. It's just food for thought. Is your company open to that? Have you considered roles outside of the city? Is there a different city or area that makes sense to target? For energy, is that hot energy areas like Houston or Denver, for example? But the tech companies in Calgary are feeling this more than anywhere. So they are opening up their minds to hiring outside of Calgary for sure. And they're losing tech people in Calgary to companies down in Silicon Valley, et cetera, all over the place. So another thing for retention, one other thing I'd touch on here is professional development. We hear it a lot from candidates. Again, they want to know about the culture. Is it a learning culture? Is it a coaching culture? Is there paid training? Do they offer leadership courses? Is there rotational programs? What can help you retain people is investing in people. And it sounds counterintuitive because you build them up and then they're more likely to leave because they're more qualified. But in fact, you built them up and they're more likely to stay because you've invested in them, or you've built them up to your role eventually and you've built them up for promotion internally. So a lot of companies, small businesses in particular, overlook this. Large companies and large pubcos typically have these programs ingrained because they know the importance. We hear a lot of small mediums are like, well, we'll cover your CPA dues, but that's really it. We don't really have paid training. So think about that. It's a small cost to really invest in your people and to make them stickier for your company. And the other thing I would say, probably two more things, I'll wrap up and get off the stage here. My apologies. The strategy piece, it's that transparency. Again, I speak a lot to finance and accounting because that's my background and that's what we focus on for recruiting. But we hear a lot about accountants getting frustrated in their role because they see this much of the business, but they want to know about this much, or they want involvement, or they want to know about the strategy, or what the business is doing, what's moving the ops. So it could be as simple as involving your teams in the strategy of the company and making sure they're aware and kind of contributing to some of that involvement if possible. However that's possible. It's different for everybody, but I bet you there's a way you can start looping your employees into that and make them stick here. And so my last kind of comment overall is really about engagement, right? It's, do you know what your employee engagement is? Like, are you measuring your engagement? Do you have a sense? Is it low or is it high? Is it your gut? The big trend we're seeing in the last year, even 2 years, is employers taking it much more seriously. They're doing NPS scores, they're measuring it. And NPS score can be as simple as 3 questions, right? I'm sure you guys can all Google NPS, Net Promoter Score, and see what that is. But the smaller, the simpler, the better. You know, would you recommend this place to a friend or colleague? What's your reason for your rating, and how would you improve your work experience here? If you do ask those questions to your employees, be ready to act on them. But it's a simple way to start measuring your engagement and actually, you know, be transparent about the results and actually action on them, because you can drive it higher. And it might be really simple things your employees are looking for. You're like, oh, I didn't realize that was an issue here. We can do this and address it, action on it, and you can see engagement go up. And again, comp is one thing, it drives retention as well, but there's so many other elements that we hear from candidates on a daily basis that they're looking for this in the company. They're looking for these certain things. So hopefully that's a few concepts that spur some thoughts and questions for you. Remember, people are your number one asset, but replacing them is very expensive. So retention is super important.
Awesome, Ryan. A lot of great information there. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Jamie.
Awesome, thank you. So I want to bring it all together in regards to financial strategy, because I think that a lot of our members are either finance leaders or business leaders that are hoping to use people, process, and technology in a way to amplify their business, not to be cheesy, and get on that path of transformation and continuous improvement. So, you know, we had a chance to talk with Tara, and she talked about how process can make a difference. And when we talk about financial strategy, where process can really make a difference is in that efficiency that Tara spoke about, right? So Greg pointed out that we don't want best practices per se, and Tara pointed out it's not about, you know, making everything better, but it is about being efficient. And obviously, to the degree that you can have that efficiencies, you can scale and you can create higher growth and higher revenue without associated corresponding costs, right? And process is a big part of that. If your people are more efficient, they're not having errors, things are documented. So when you do get in that situation where you have a retention concern or new staff, they can pick up the process, they can pick up the role and responsibility quickly. Very, very important if you want to be profitable, to have all of those things be streamlined. Jordan talked about ERPs and technology, and similar to process, the more that we have automation and systems, the less we have to invest in costs. And so what Ryan didn't mention about people being your most important assets is that they are also generally the most expensive thing in your business. So regardless of what kind of business you run, labor and staffing costs are generally one of the biggest costs that you have. And so when you can reduce the need to add a body every time there's a new situation or a new division or a new idea, and you can instead have process and technology holding a lot of that efficiencies and allowing you to scale, you will inherently be more profitable. So all of these things work together in all areas, but especially when it comes to profit and financial strategy. So in particular, I want to talk again about scale. So when we're trying to grow businesses, and all the clients that Amplify works with in all of our service lines, that's really what they all have in common, is they're all trying to grow. So by having better processes, better technology, and the right people on the bus, the right people that are the assets of the business, you can really find that with the revenue, you continue to see year after year growth in revenue, which is corresponding to growth in profit. However, if you don't invest in technology and you don't invest in your people and you don't invest in your process, what you'll find is a $5 million business quickly becomes a $12 million business and is actually less profitable with far more employee burnout, far more founder and executive burnout, and not any profit to speak of. So what is the point of growth if you don't have scale? That's really the question. And when we talk to our bigger businesses in town, it's really not that different. If they don't invest in those processes and technologies, no matter how big the business, they won't see the profit at the bottom of the income statement. And then that growth is a lot of stress, a lot of effort, and a lot of risk, but without the end objective of a financial strategy that corresponds with a financially healthy company. When it comes to team, I think it's really, really important, and Ryan touched on a lot of this, that ultimately, if you want to have a financially healthy business, to the point that was made, your biggest asset are your people. And so you really need that strategy and your culture to be top of mind. And when you invest in employee experience, you do inherently invest in your customer experience, your client experience, and your ultimate profitable engagement. So it is really vital that you have a strategy that's understood at all levels. And I think Ryan touched on this a bit. It corresponds directly to employment engagement and retention. So regardless of whether you're a transactional payables clerk or whether you're a director in sales, you should understand why you're on the bus, why you have that seat on the bus, and how it ties directly to the strategy, and how that strategy ties to a bigger purpose within your community or what the company's trying to achieve. And a lot of evidence out there shows that the best way to keep the right people and to get the profit that you want is to have that line between strategy and purpose all the way to every seat that you have on the team. And so it's really, really important to take those days, whether it be every quarter or every year or every month, and really reinvest in the strategy and the understanding and that collaborative conversation with all levels within your business. And it will inherently give you a more financially healthy business. The last thing I want to talk about is reporting. And so obviously, if you don't understand where you're at and what your numbers are, you're going to have troubles understanding where you're going and if you're on track to achieve that financial strategy that you're hoping to achieve. So it is vital for growth to have good data and good information. And Greg spoke about data and how it's becoming the fourth pillar, and we've heard of governance being the fourth pillar as well. And I think that what's interesting about data is that data is part of people, it is part of process, and is part of automation. And so the more that you have data, the more that you can amplify your growth in a very quick way. So even at Amplify, for example, with the implementation of our NetSuite and the ability for us to use data on pretty much every Monday or Tuesday, the executive team is looking at the data, looking at the numbers, looking at the utilization. It's incredible how quickly you can see profit within a month or two, let alone the long-term ability to use that data. And so the only way that you have good data is if you have reports where people can access the data in a way that it's not just numbers or tables or information. It has to be insightful and it has to be audience appropriate. So it's really, really important to take all of these opportunities, the process, the people, and the technology, and think about how all of those are advancing the information that's being used by the leaders and the executing staff within your business. So it's really the financial strategy of the businesses, no matter what size they are, if they take people, process, and technology and they use it for scale, they use it to build a great team, and they use it for reporting, we see companies achieve their profit quicker and on track for what they're expecting. So those are the areas that I think really make a difference to companies that are looking to grow and be financially healthy while they do it.
That's great, Jamie. I had one question just come in, and it sort of hits on a few points here. Is what tips would you give a business looking to introduce more technology if you're focused on improving your processes? So it's a wild question, but maybe just get a few thoughts from the different people on that. So what are tips for introducing the technology to improve processes?
Jordan, do you want to take that one, or I can take it too?
So I was gonna say, it's kind of like, it kind of touches on all areas. So what are the tips of using technology to increase processes? Was that it there?
Improve the processes. Yeah.
Improve processes. Yeah, so I would say what we're seeing is it depends on the technology you're using, I would say. And it also would start with having that process, kind of to what Tara's point would say, written down and understood. And then how is that process transferred into technology? So what I mean by that is oftentimes, like I'll use NetSuite for an example, because we're kind of experts in that field. So NetSuite has pre-built systems and processes in place in the actual technology. So you can use their processes and systems to put that into your business. So that's one route you could go. The other route, though, is if you have a certain process that is, kind of customer configured to your actual business, then you would need to look at can the technology handle that, and can we create that process in the system? Or is it, better to actually use the standard system of that standard process within that technology? So to summarize, key points would be understand the actual process, have that documented. Can the technology accommodate it from a custom level, or is there a pre-built system in that technology that you can use instead? So I hope that answers the question.
Anyone else want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think Jordan nailed it. I mean, when we go into the implementations, and he leads the sales process for NetSuite, so he's doing this every day, we always try and remind people that where they can take the NetSuite process, there's a lot of scale and opportunity there. But if it's magic and it's directly associated with their strategy and what makes them special in their industry and their core competencies, then that's where you'd want to spend your time customizing. What you don't want to do is customize everything just assuming that your current process is the best, because then you end up with a hodgepodge of code that no one else can understand. You're not taking advantage of cloud, and you're not taking advantage of industry best practices that NetSuite brings, for example, but other systems do as well. The only other thing too I'd point out, and I think every single one of us struggles with this, is that I think, and this isn't sexy and it's not cool, but the reality is you need to sometimes do a process manually before you even look at technology. And none of us like that, and it's not fun, but usually it makes sense. So for example, Jordan and I are experiencing this right now, right, where we're doing some different tracking of various data. And there's probably 15 cool, amazing, and not even expensive systems that we could be purchasing to track that data. But we have to be disciplined and sit on our hands and realize, wait a minute, we should be tracking this with Excel and finding out what in the world we want to do with the data before we chase the yellow ball and invest in a system that directs us towards a certain way or a certain approach. And that can be hard, because it's not that these apps aren't expensive on a one-by-one basis, and they look so awesome and they're very convincing. But if you just jump into the technology without truly understanding what you're trying to do from a process perspective, I think you miss a lot of opportunities. So stepping back and doing things the old-fashioned way and then automating still tends to be the best way to do it.
Well, I'll add quickly on that point too. There is a lot of different, to Jamie's point, different software options out there for whatever you're looking for. Chances are there's a system that, or app or software that specializes in it. You just kind of got to do the right research to find that out. So it's also super important. So there's a ton of different options and systems that can do what you want it to do, but it's also important that you find out which one is the best and right fit for your business. So just another piece to look at. And I think that ties into Jamie's point there of understanding what you actually need before you move down that road.
Great. Is there any other questions from people? Checking the chat line now. No.
Awesome. We used that time really well, Greg. So now we can move into your demo.
Okay, just give me a sec while I transition if you want to chat a bit.
perfect.
So, and I won't be watching the chat line when I do this. So,
No, if anyone has questions for Greg while he's doing the demo, please still send them to the chat and I'll help. I'll go back to the facilitating chair. I had a good little 45-minute break. So Greg is going to show us Black Owl. So this is a really good example of a system and an automation opportunity that that people can put in place to support both accountants and operations for those of us that follow US GAAP or IFRS, especially because of the what I would say is somewhat onerous lease standards in accounting, which affects everybody in the business. But obviously, if you weren't under US GAAP and IFRS, there could still maybe be value for you as well. So this is a great example of a process being automated to meet a compliance need. And for lots of our audience members today that are finance leaders, if you have assets in your business and you have leases, I think this is a great sneak peek of an example of a process and automation that'll make that that group of people's life much better and much more engaged. So instead of spending days and days in those Excel spreadsheets that Tara spoke about, they'll instead get to do what Ryan spoke about and think about the strategy and the overall purpose of your business, which is better for everyone. All right, Greg, you can, your Zoom, I can see myself, so you should move me out.
oh, am I got the wrong screen?
I can see AHA with Amplify in your screen, but I can also see your Zoom box.
Okay, oh, this. Are we good now?
Yeah, I think so. Perfect.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jamie. You know, it's thanks for a great lead into what we've done at Black Owl. And, you know, as we were building this system, it did start truly from the ground up, focused on process. And then we layered on is how can we leverage modern technology to achieve functionality that we think is not available today in the market. And so with that said, our whole focus when we were creating this application was modernizing finance is a term that we like to use. Is part of it's not just accounting, it's not lease accounting, it's overall finance and managing the businesses. So what do we want to achieve with what we're delivering in our system? And it was focused on cut the manual accounting. As what Tara was talking about is the financial close. We know lease accounting has been a burden for many organizations. And this was a key point when we designed the system is we've got to help the accountants close that financial close quicker. And the auditors in the audience always want increased balance sheet integrity, and which is key to any good system. Just like with NetSuite, you know, strong controls and audit trails. And our overall goal at Black Owl is we make the complex tasks of lease accounting simple. With that said, you know, I'm going to go back to this simple process flow: lease entry, master data, lease schedule, approval, journal entries as we go through the system. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the system. And if anyone wants a more detailed review of the system, just let me know or reach out to Jamie. We can definitely arrange that and get you a full demo. So some of the top features in our system was easy to use interface, lease changes, and being able to go back and do retroactive changes. So if you knew that the event happened 3 months ago, but you didn't book it, all those periods are closed in your financials. So you want to go back and record the actual event and book that into the current period. So we've been able to accommodate that in our lease change. We'll show you the month-end close and some unique booking methods, and I'll just talk about that a bit later here. So with that said, I am going to show the system here, and I'm just going to slide this over. Okay, so just a quick, simple look of our system. We've got dashboards. And what you see in your dashboard is an approved lease. So this is showing all your leases that you've had, and we've got different types of leases, leases that are coming due in 3 months, approved leases. So overall, our system isn't just for accounting, it's also for lease administration. Because when the regulations changed 4 years ago that accounting now had to do the accounting for leases, they also had to start participating in the administration. So what does a lease look like? And when you enter a lease, you've got your general information about the lease, how you want it coded and where do you want it coded so it goes into your accounting system. Any fees, lease end, whether it's going to be allocated to other parts of the business. You've got some attachments that go along with that, your lease agreement. Then you start seeing, okay, you've got your payment schedule. Okay, that's important. And this screen is your history of the lease. We'll talk about changes later, but we've got a full log of all the changes. And my mouse is just dying. Hold on a second here. I'll go to this. Okay. We've got lease schedule. I'm just going to drag this down. So this is your amortization schedule that the accountants would be looking for. Hold on. I'm just going to, we're all having our tech challenges today. So I'm just going to move my mouse USB. Tell a funny story or something, Jamie, while this is happening.
I have a wired mouse for this very reason.
Yeah, I stopped my Bluetooth and went with the USB driven one. So, and it just has technology.
We're good now.
Yeah. Okay, so we're good. So here's the lease schedule that people would see in their Excel spreadsheet showing, the fixed payment, the present value, all of your information that you'd be looking for. And what happens then is what's important with that lease schedule is it drives to your journal entries. So what we have is when we create a lease, we create all of the journal entries from inception to all the monthly journal entries and to the end. And if you see here as well, we track also your contract currency, functional currency, and presentation. So we also do FX if that's required. So that's what a lease record looks like. And then for managing your master data. So, whether you're a small organization or a large organization, this is all the key information that you need. And, a lot of times it's overwhelming that people don't realize when they're building their spreadsheets or doing a conversion that you need, not just the companies you've got, any cost objects, business units, if you want to, your journal entries require that information. I mentioned FX rates, incremental borrowing. Here's an example. With the regulations, if you're using an IBR rate, it's based on the type of asset it is. So we have our asset class, what condition it is, and for dollar value. So for some of the larger companies, this is an important thing that has to be managed. And managing it centrally is very beneficial than hoping that you're managing those rates correctly in spreadsheets. As well, setting up a new company. And let's say you're an organization, you have 2 different companies on 2 different accounting systems, or you're a larger company with 20 different companies and with 3 sets of GLs, and all different. Well, this is where you go in and set up your information with regards to what companies you want journal entries for. And then you simply go in and for those companies, map all of those companies to the GL codes that they would want. So you would select your company that you want, and then these are all of the journal entry fields required for lease accounting. And if you just look at it, those who aren't familiar with lease accounting, that's a lot of GL codes. It just shows the complexity of lease accounting. Where it used to be is book lease to expense line on the income statement and credit cash or accounts payable. Now you're taking those assets that used to be an income statement transaction, and now you've got to be booking setting up an asset on your balance sheet. You've got to set up a liability. You've got to do short-term, long-term liability booking. You've got interest expense and your depreciation expense, all from something that used to be a simple debit and credit. So for there, we'll talk much more about the master data, but I'm going to pull this back. And okay, easy to use interface. So looking for people, this was something when we designed the system, we had a lot of feedback saying it's got to be simpler. We've got to have something that's easy to use. And Derek, who is part of Black Owl, the system he was familiar with to create a new lease required 26 screens to go in and out. So hopefully we've got something a lot easier than that. So I'm going to set up a new Tesla. We're going to go orange. Set up the unique ID, deciding which company you want it to be. You select your vendors, which we set up as part of master data. When are you going to want to start it? And we'll just say it starts in January 1st. It's a 1-year lease. Bing. And picking the currency. As I showed before, we're capable of doing multi-currency and so functional rates, presentation rates. Our system's right now hooked to the Bank of Canada, but we can hook it to any accounting system or other source. Then you go through your questionnaires. Does this lease require any of the following? Is there identifiable asset? Does the customer have a right to choose these? So these are the questions that pick which accounting standard for IFRS lessee. And we have the same for US GAAP and lessor leases as well. So you have the qualifications that you want, or if you right away know what it is, you just pick your qualification and you go. We've got the functionality if we want to define a hierarchy for managing your leases. If you're a larger organization and you've got 30 vehicles from GM and 30 from Ford, you may want to build a hierarchy just to help you manage that. Stuff that may not be available in your accounting system, but now you can do this as a part of your lease administration. You go into your coding now, straight line, business unit, and just quickly going in here, we're going to allocate it to 100% to this cost center. We've got the flexibility if you want it to projects or split between different business units. All that functionality is there, and all this is part of the output for the journal entries. Making it simple, remembering, oh, hold on, we had lease incentives, we had direct costs. Oh, what's the residual value? All of this information, we've got it here. So as you're going through setting up, prompting the questions, or if you're looking at the lease agreement, those will be in there, easy to find. So the key is we have to set up a payment. I'm going to say we're $2,000 a month, 12 payments. You save the payment, so we've got it there. We can pull in, as I showed you in the IBR rate from our table. You hit the light bulb, it pulls in the rate, and let's say you said, oh, no, that's not the rate we're using. We want to use 3% instead. You can override that. We've got the flexibility for variable cost. And a good example of a variable cost part of a lease is if you're at Chinook and you're renting or leasing a storefront and you have to pay a base lease of X dollars a month, but there's a variable based on revenue. So you can set up that variable cost. And as you go through your month-end steps, you can hit, if you have any variable cost parts of a lease or completely, as you're going through your month-end process, which I'll show later, quick reminder, hold on, got to update that variable cost. And it goes back to what Tara's talking about is process design. Any other costs, and this is a good example if you've got a vehicle and you've done prepaid maintenance. So why would you want to track that where it's not part of the lease? Well, the invoice that you're getting that you're going to want to reconcile in your ERP system's got lease payment and prepaid maintenance costs in there. So it's for $2,050. And if your lease obligation is only $2,000, you want that $50 picked up. So when you're reconciling that, it's available. Any conditions for lease end? So as I'm stepping and describing these screens, you can see the complexity of leases. And so when you get to the point, leveraging your workflows, you pick who you want to approve it. If you have any custom attributes, we've developed, each client can pick whatever they want, create any new information that they want that's important for them to manage. It's all, we just set it up in master data, and every lease will now have this. If you have any notes that you want to attach to certain fields within your lease, so it shows in your lease record saying this vendor likes to be paid on the 5th business day of each month. You can make a little note of that and it shows, and as attachments are there. So once all your information is ready, you request approval and we wait. And so our system is hosted on AWS, and just for those, and each person gets a single tenant, so it's not multi-tenant. So each client gets their own instance of the application and their own database, and that's the preferred security. So what you've got is then you, again, that lease record that I initially showed you, you have one last chance. You can take a look at it and verify that all the information that you want is there. And then it's off with the workflow, and the person will be getting a notification in their inbox to go approve that lease. So one of the points that I talked about was the monthly accounting. So what's part of monthly accounting? So I mentioned about the variable costs. So if you have any leases that are variable costs, it'll show up here, and then you enter the variable units consumed that you're tracking, and you've already have your cost per units, your GL, all of this is already sitting in the system ready to go. Then the other thing is, if you have any leases that are coming due, that are coming off your books, so it's hitting that lease end and you don't want that in your system, it's an inactive lease, it'll come in here saying, hey, in this month, accounting now has to terminate that lease. So there you go. And then when you terminate it, you're removing that, doing that, posting that final journal entry you need to remove it from your asset and liability of your records. So again, all focus on process efficiencies. Then you get into your month-end close, and this is as simple as it is. So we've got any draft reports. If you have any leases coming due within a few months you want to look at, or accounting saying, hey, we've got a fleet of vehicles expiring next month, and we haven't seen anything replacing that. Maybe we should go talk to supply chain and find out where is that. So we build any reports that the accountants need to know in their month-end step. It's right here. If you have any leases running on index rates, hit a button, it updates it and creates your change. You run your FX for revaluation, hit a button, it posts all of those. And then you've got your audit trail, opening and closing your months for the business. So you don't want to be going back to prior periods and creating new leases. Now you can do change, post a change back and bring it forward, but it's just like NetSuite or any other ERP. You want to close that month-end step. So that's as simple as our month-end process is. And the ultimate is running your journal entries. So you want to know, what are your journal entries? So I'll pick January. Which accounting standard you want your journal entries for, which currency. I'm just going to do aggregated. You'll hit view, and there are all your journal entries aggregated. Now, if you want them single entry, you hit single entry, and it'll process all those journal entries and give you the details. Now, if you're a larger organization, you may not want the single entries because that could be hundreds or thousands of lines of code, but aggregating it and posting it, and you always know you've got your audit trail here going back. What were the journal entries for this period? Now, I ran it for an entire year. You'd be wanting to run it for a shorter period of time. for that month. So one of the things I talked about before was lease change. And that was one of the features that we're very proud of what we've done. So I'm just going to pick any lease that we've got here. And let's say we are in March right now, but we knew that last year we actually had an extra payment or the payment changed. Well, how do you do that and track that? Now it's complex in the spreadsheet. You're going and changing this. Here's my new values, but what it does is it recasts your entire lease schedule, and then you've got new journal entries for the whole thing. So what's important for us was we have to lock the past, what's happened for the first 6 months of last year, and then recast the lease schedule and all the journal entries going forward after that. You hit the change button, it brings it into change mode. So you can go in and change any of the fields that in gray, and you can just go update what those updates are and go from there. If you want to add another variable cost, if you want to add another payment. And so if I want to add another payment, and I'm not going to save this, I'm not going to read one payment, and it's going to start. Let's see what it was last year. So what we've done is now we can go in and we can look at, okay, what period do I want to post that to, and what period do I want to go back to? So we've built all this functionality to do retroactive adjustments. And again, thinking of trying to do this and track this in a spreadsheet, we've tried to think, what do the accountants want for process and what's going to make the accountant's life the best for them. And as well, we've pre-built all the disclosure reports you'd need for your financial reporting footnotes or disclosure notes, and as well a bunch of management reports for what you need to help administer or do reconciles or however you want to do it. And for larger conversions, or if you've got a lot of new lease obligations, we have a bulk upload tool where you drag a Excel spreadsheet that you've pre-populated and post. So quick demo, that's what I've got. So open to questions, and I'm looking for, and I'm going to stop sharing here.
So one question that came up, Greg, was change management and how that affects any system selection or decision to move a process into technology. And I know that what's interesting about your Black Owl is that, you know, the timing of when it came out, people had already adopted some of the other lease softwares and or just revamped their historical lease process or technology to meet the new standards. So wondering, you know, what you've seen from a change management perspective in terms of getting people on board to make that leap to Black Owl, and
Yeah.
how that would affect, you know, not just Black Owl, but any change management when it comes to technology and making that.
Great question. So yeah, we can prove and demonstrate that we've got that process improvement, and that's the ultimate. And you know, with that process improvement comes the cost saving. And it may not be reducing in a FT or account. That just means they can be redeployed on more valuable things. We recently talked to a company with 200 leases that they're administering, and they said each month they were spending 3 days per month trying to update their spreadsheets and come up with the journal entries they needed in the reports. But the change management is a really good question. We talked to a larger organization and we got introduced to the CFO, and the CFO said, you know, I think everything's good. I haven't heard any complaints for a few years. So he says, hey, I'll introduce you to the controller. And the controller says, yeah, hey, I'd love to see what you have. So we gave the demo, and there was the controller and the manager of financial reporting. And we said, what do you think? And this is a company that had 800 leases doing in spreadsheets. And the controller says, yeah, this is good, but you know, for us, I don't know if there's a fit because, you know, again, like the CFO, I haven't heard of anything, you know. So the manager of financial reporting shaking his head and says, stop the bus. We got an issue. This is biggest pain we have of month-end process, and especially quarterly. I hate lease accounting. You don't realize how inefficient this is, but people have been forgetting about it. It's that process is, hey, out of sight, out of mind. We heard a lot of noise 4 years ago that, hey, this is a big issue. We don't like the system we selected. And people have forgotten about it. So, you know, by having this opportunity, we can help reintroduce people that there can be a better way.
Yeah, and I think that raises a good point. I mean, when you show what the benefits are, that helps with change management always, right? And then to your other point, if you start involving and getting buy-in at all the different levels so that people understand, that can go a long ways as well. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Speaking of continuous improvement, it looks like you guys have made quite a bit of improvement to your software.
Yeah.
Quite different actually from the last time I looked at it, which it was good then as well. So another question I have is, you know, not specific to Black Owl, but maybe you can use it as an example. You know, obviously Black Owl in of itself has the ability to take over a lot of processes in relation to leases, and it automates. But you also have noted that it integrates into ERP systems. So question, do most of your clients, do they integrate into the ERP right when you implement Black Owl, or are they doing a stepped approach or a phase approach, and how does that all work with your implementations of Black Owl, but also from your Lumina hat, you know, where you've seen success in different ways of implementing new processes and new systems?
So I'm putting my Lumina hat. So any ERP that we do with those interfaces, I always try to defer the people to do it manually first. Get that. Don't try as you go live with a new system, build these complex interfaces, understand the data and information that's coming out, do a few months of manual upload. And then after you're comfortable with the data and the information, then start looking at those interfaces. And that's the practice that we've had now. You know, so for the first clients, we said, let's go with just the journal entry export. We can modify it if a client's got a unique thing. We've got the flexibility in our configuration to change how it goes, or we can map it in the CSV upload and then build that interface. So for one of our clients, we've just kicked off building that interface now with their ERP system. They're happy with the entries they're getting now. They're comfortable. And they're saying, okay, well, that took a lot of pressure off the project implementation, trying to build an interface. Now we've got the data. There's no rush. Let's do it right. And then we can also do the interface of, let's say you have a client that wants to bring in vendors and you're a large organization. We can build those as well. It's a two-way, the APIs that we have that'll work. But we don't want every vendor. So, you know, if we're talking CP Rail, we don't want every vendor CP Rail has. We want just anything that's related to leases. So there's got to be some filters on that side. And same goes with NetSuite. You know, we can build the technology is there. Very easy to build that interface.
Awesome. So one of the examples that you gave, Greg, when you were doing the demo is that, you know, it's not just about reducing the number of people, because some people get scared that continuous improvement and transformation could be about, you know, eliminating jobs. And obviously there's some sensitivity because these are humans that you're friends with, you work with, or maybe it's your own job even that is on the line. But I think you made a good point, and it really tied in well with what Ryan was saying, is that it's not necessarily about losing a job, but it's about doing more value added or strategy aligned work. So some of the examples you were giving is, you know, accounting, maybe proactively asking supply chain when a lease was coming up, as opposed to it being a scramble at the last minute when you're got the call from the you know, from the leaseholder, or making big decisions at the last minute and not really having decisions because you just get forced into a situation unexpectedly. So I thought that was a really good tie-in. And, you know, I guess when it comes to growth companies, sometimes it could be one of two things. It's a matter of not hiring, you know, you already got George doing this, and now you don't have to hire Georgina as well, because you've got process and technology so that one person can handle, you know, you have 800 leases. Now one person can still handle 1,600 leases. Those numbers might not be accurate, but you get my point. So sometimes it's about not hiring more people, and other times it's about giving the people you have better engagement. Like, do you have a story about where you've seen that either with Black Owl or some of the other Lumina clients?
Yeah, well, or going back to my personal, it goes back to, you want people not to be accountants, to be data entry, and you want them to change their roles to more analysis, more time to think. And that goes with the CPA seminars I talk about, is we want to have tools to make not life easier, but much more efficient. So we don't want to be data capture, data entry, keying in information, building new spreadsheets, reconciling spreadsheets. We want value added time. And if you have more value added time, you're less prone to errors, and you make better decisions and more informed decisions if you have good information, good data, good systems to give that information to you.
Awesome. I think that's a great wrap. Thanks everybody for joining us. Once again, you can join us for the third Tuesday in April, when we're going to have Jeffrey Kahn come and talk about supply chain and digitalization. And then in May, we have the opportunity for the 24-hour rule with Adrian from Risk Oversight, and lots more coming up after that. So appreciate all of your attendance and participation. And if you have questions, feel free to send them our way and we can address them offline. Thanks, guys.
Great, thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.